Okay, we're gonna just start the Gemara. I want to point out something that's interesting that you may not be realize this, but every day in davening you talk about the avodas Yom Kippurim. When you say this statement, "V'hoshev esu avoda lidvir beisacha," right? "V'hoshev lidvir beisacha," this thing right here. What that means is that Hashem should restore the service to the Holy of Holies in your house. That means you're praying every day that the avodas Yom HaKippurim should come back again, should be restored again. And most people don't realize that every day in your tefillah, you're actually davening for the Yom Kippur service to come back every day, 3 times a day. Because Lidvir means the Holy of Holies. It's another name for Holy of Holies. The Kodesh Kadoshim is Dvir.
Wow.
I didn't know that people would realize that.
That's great. I never would realize that. And There's only one time you go to the Holy of Holies. That's Yom Kippur. That's it.
Right. Oh, that's it. No other time.
Right.
So that's how important it is. And that we pray for it 3 times a day.
Yeah.
Okay. We are discussing over here an interesting question. The question is like this. The Chumash says, this is the way Aharon would come into the Holy of Holies. Bepar. Bepar means a cow. Now, obviously, he doesn't enter the Kodesh Gadashim with a cow. He enters in with the blood of the cow, right? The blood of the cow. It's not the cow itself, but it's the blood of the cow. And he sprays, after the Ketoris, he's spraying the blood. We'll see more about that later. So the Gemara is dealing with a question: what happens if the Kohen shechted the par, the Kohen Gadol shechted the par, and then the poor man passed on? And the question is, can the Kohen who replaced him, can he use that blood, or does he have to reshech the par? That's the question. And this is what the question's all about. So the question is, does he have to redo it, or can he use the second par? And so we had a whole machlokes over here in the Gemara. Can he use the second one? So let's read it inside. We'll just read one of them. Rab Ami Amar Bepar V'loy B'dami Shapar. What the Torah means is that the Kohen Gadol had to slaughter the par, not just bring the blood into the Kodesh Kodashim, because the word par means you start from scratch. Rabbi Yitzchak Amar Bepar V'afilu B'dami Shapar. It means cow, but the blood is also called cow. So even if the second Kohen Gadol who took over for the first Kohen that passed away, even if he didn't slaughter the par, he can bring in the blood of the par. You don't have to re-slaughter the par. So that is a machlokes between Rabbi Yami and Rabbi Yitzchak. And the question revolves around, how do you look at the word par? Does it mean a live cow? Or could it mean just the blood of the cow is called a cow? Okay, it's a strange question, but that's what the Gemara is dealing with. But so here we are. We're up to over here. About Nunamit Sheni, 5 lines from the bottom. Mosiv Marzutra. Marzutra asked the question. It says, you know that you have to be paida a chamor. If a person has a donkey and he has a firstborn of the donkey, the Chumash says that you have to redeem it. For the Kohen, you have to give him a gift. And you give him a gift of a seh, of a sheep, or you can give him a goat. It has to be in that family. So the Mishnah says, Ein poidin, you can't redeem a peter chamor, that means the bechor of a donkey, loy be'egel, you can't give the Kohen a calf, like a cow. That's not the Torah says sheep. V'loy bechaya, you can't give him a deer. V'loy b'shchuta, and you can't. And here's the question: you can't give the Kohen a slaughtered seh, a slaughtered sheep for his pidyon peter chamor, because that's not a sheep. A sheep is a live. In the Chumash eyes, a sheep is a live sheep or live goat. V'loy b'treifa, you can't give him a treifa, means an animal that's going to die very soon. V'loy b'chalayim, you can't give him a mix, a crossbreed of an animal, of a sheep and a sheep and a goat. You can't give him that. v'loy b'koi, or another type of mixture of an animal that has half sheep and half wild animal. Ella, you can only use beseh, only a live animal sheep you can give to the kohen. But what do you see? That if you have a slaughtered sheep, you still can't give it to the kohen because a slaughtered sheep is not a sheep. So the Gemara wants to apply that logic and say, slaughtered cow, blood of a cow is not a cow. So the Gemara says, Shana Hosem, that's different. The Yol of Saseh Pesach, because we have Gzeira Shava that learns Saseh from Pesach, that just like Carbon Pesach, the Torah over there is referring to a live sheep. So also by Pedian Petach Hamor, it's a live sheep. And so that's because it's Gzeira Shava, but that's the exception to the rule. But could be that, but when it says par in our Chumash, it doesn't mean the live par, it means the blood of a par. So the Gemara says, Ima lahalon zochor tomim uben shana. If you're learning it out from Karm Pesach, just like over there, you're required to have a zochor tom, a male animal. It has to be a 1-year-old animal. Afkan, so also by pidin bet chamor, zochor tom, it should be a whole animal. Uben shana should be 1 year old. And the truth is, by pidin petach hamor, it could be a nekeva, it could be a zochor, it could be 1-year-old or 3-year-old. It doesn't matter. But hey, you have a Gzeira Shava from Pesach. Why don't you learn all that out? So the Gemara says Talmud Bavli, because there's another pasuk that says Tifte Riba. It says the word Tifte, redeem, and that means all inclusive, which means you could redeem the Peter Chamor with a sheep, albeit it has to be alive, but it could be a Zachar and a Keva, 1-year-old, 3-year-old. That's what. So if the Gemara says tifta riba, if you have the word tifta tifa that makes it all inclusive, afilu kulu nami, then all those, even a shchuta should be included, because tifta should imply all inclusive. Even a slaughtered animal should be fine, should be good enough to as opinion. So the Gemara says in Cain, if that's the case, se ma ahanale. What is the Gzeira se teaching you? So the se teaches you that it can only be a live sheep, and the word that's the Gzeira Shava to Pesach, and the word tifta means to make it all inclusive, that you could use a sheep, a goat, a male or female, or even a wounded goat, a wounded sheep. That's good enough, but it still has to be alive. Now we go to Nun Amar Aleph. Esrei Rabbi Yitzchak Napochel Rabami. Rabbi Yitzchak asked Rabami, you say that what? That something that's blood is not called a cow. The Torah talks about there's a certain type of cow called a par kohen Mashiach. That means if a kohen by accident made an avera, according to he paskined wrong. He paskined, let's say you're allowed to put a light on Shabbos, and then he realized he made the mistake and he was putting on lights on Shabbos. So he doesn't bring the normal carbon khatas that every Jew brings. He brings what's called a par kohen Mashiach, the cow. And what the Torah says, you slaughter the cow, you sprinkle it on the mizbeach, on the heichal. You sprinkle it on the curtain inside the heichal, and then you take the whole par and burn it. So you bring it outside and burn it. So here the Chumash says, "V'hoitzi es kol hapar." You take the entire par, the dead cow, and you burn it outside the Beis Hamikdash. So we see that the Torah does call a cow a dead thing, that even if it's not alive, it's still called a par. So the Gemara says that's not what it means. Sheyoitze es kulai. What that means, you take out the remnants of the original par. The Torah doesn't call the dead par, the dead cow, a cow. What the Torah is saying, just take out the remnants of the live cow, which is now dead, but not that the word par means a dead cow. So then the Gemara says, wait a second, there's another pasuk that says, Beis para chatos, ve'esir hachatos, and there, that's talking about the para chatos, esir hachatos of Yom Kippur, right? The Torah says that after the cow was sprinkled inside the Kodesh Kedoshim, and the goat of Yom Kippur sprinkled inside the Kodesh Kedoshim, the Torah says, take it out and burn it. Take the whole thing out of the Beis Hamikdash and burn it. You see, the Chumash does call a dead cow a par, right? And the dead seer a seer. So Amar Papa, that's the point. Okay, I grant you. A dead cow is still called a cow. Ba'ar, basar uperish, if you have the skin, the meat, and the insides of the cow, the kuli alma loy pligi, nobody would argue that's not cow. When the Chumash says cow, it doesn't dafka only mean a live cow, it can mean a dead cow with its body. He pligi, but our argument is bedam, the blood. So is that if you only have the blood and you have nothing else, like in our case, you slaughtered the kohen slaughtered the par. Now all you have is blood, and he died. And now you want the second kohen to take over and bring that blood into the Kodesh Kedoshim to spray it. Is that enough? Is that called bringing the cow into the Kodesh Kedoshim? The question is the blood of a cow called a cow? Marsava dam ikir kvar. One holds that the blood is called a cow, and therefore the kohen could use that blood. He doesn't have to reshecht a new par. The other opinion holds dam lo ikri par. Blood is not called the cow, and therefore, if a kohen died, the next kohen has to restart it again and shecht a new cow. Amar Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi asked, Mistavra, I think it's logical, Kimanda Omar, like the person that said dam ikre par, that the blood enough is called a par. The blood is called a par. When the Chumash says par, it means the blood. Why? Because look at the pasuk itself, which we brought. The ksiv bezois yovai aharon el hakodesh b'par b'mbakar. The Torah says, with this, Aaron will walk into the Holy of Holies with a cow. Wait, atu bekarne ba'al yilei. What does the Chumash mean? Does the kohen bring does he bring the animal into the Kodesh Kedoshim with the horns? He's bringing it ela b'damei. He's only bringing it with the blood. Certainly, the Torah is telling you that the blood, you come into the Kodesh with the blood, with the par, which is just the blood of the cow. The korele par, and the Chumash calls the blood of a cow. So that's a proof that dam ikre par, that dam is called a cow. The idach and the other man, the Amar, who holds dam is not called a cow. So he will learn pshat in the pasuk. What gives Aharon the permission to come into the Holy of Holies? Bepar ben bakar lechatas, if he already slaughtered a cow for a chatas, but not that the blood is called a cow. The slaughtering of the cow gave him permission to go into the Holy of Holies, but the blood is not called a cow. So the Gemara, I think, doesn't resolve this question. The Gemara just leaves it as a question. A machlokes, if the kohen dies, can the next kohen use his blood of par, or does he have to reshacht? Now the Gemara goes into another story, and here's another interesting question. What is the problem over here? How is the kohen allowed to even if you hold that dam ikri par, how could the second kohen take over the first kohen and bring the blood into the Kodesh Kedoshim? There's a din, halacha l'Moshe Messinai, that if someone designated a carbon chatas, right, and then died, what do you do with it? A guy had a chatas, he did an aveira, he separated a carbon chatas, and now what do you do with it? He died. So this live animal has a din, halacha l'Moshe Messinai, is that you take this animal and you starve it to death. Okay, you put it in a pen and you let it starve to death. Because that's called chatas shemesu ba'aleha. So therefore, the question over here is, b'tepik, how are you allowed to use this? How is the second kohen allowed to use the first carbon chatas? It's a chatas shemesu ba'alehi. It's a chatas that the original owner died. Who owned the chatas over here? Who owned that par of Yom Kippur? That was the first kohen gadol. And we have a halacha l'Moshe Messinai that tells us the chatas shemesu ba'aleha. If you have a carbon chatas that the owner died, lemisa azla, then you let as cruel as it sounds, but you let this animal starve to death. So over here, although you slaughtered it, but you didn't sprinkle the blood yet. So once the owner of the chatas died, you can't use it anymore. So what's the answer? Amalei Ravin barav Ada l'Rava. Ravin barav Ada told Rava, Amrei Talmidayach. Your students, Rava, said, Amar Rav Amram, that Rav Amram said. So we have a teretz from Rav Amram. And the answer is, you see, the cow of a Kohen Gadol is you could call it that the Kohen Gadol, it's a private carbon because the Kohen Gadol paid for it. But at the end of the day, if you remember, the Kohen Gadol also brought with his cow an atonement for the whole Kahanim. So it's a tzibur type of carbon. And chatas tzibur he. And it's a chatas that belongs to a group, an entire tzibur. And therefore, v'loy lemisa azle, it's exempt from the halach l'maishim sine that you're supposed to kill it. Now, how do we know that this par of Yom Kippur is called a chatas tzibur? The Tanah we learned in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, the Mishnah describes that the Tanakama said, the Tanakama of this Mishnah says that every carbon tzibur is doiche tuma and doiche Shabbos, and every carbon yochid is not doiche tuma and not doiche Shabbos. That's what the Tanakama said. So on this, Amar Lai Rav Meir said to the Tanakama, V'haloi par Yom Kippurim, you said a rule that if it's a carbon yochid, it's not doiche Shabbos. But I'll prove it to you that what you're saying is not true, because the cow of Yom Kippur, the chabise Kohen Gadol, and the regular offering mincha that the Kohen Gadol brought on a daily basis, ukorban Pesach, the carbon yachidu, these are private carbons. The doiches Shabbos v'satuma. It does push away, override Shabbos and Tuma. One of the examples Rameh wants to say that par Yom Kippurim is a carbon yachid. So since Rameh says par Yom Kippur is a carbon yachid, so we can say lav miklal the ikalaman de omad de tzibur. It must be that the Tanakama argued a Rav Meir and said that the par of Yom Kippur is a tzibur carbon. So here we have a source of a Tana, the antagonist and the bar plukta of Rav Meir, who probably would hold that par Yom Kippur is a tzibur carbon, albeit that the Kohen Gadol paid for it from his own money. But since it's coming to be mechaper on everybody, that's why it's called the carbon tzibur. So the Gemara asks back, l'tamech diktoni amalei Rab Yankov. If you look at the sugya, Rab Yaakov said also against the Tanakama, v'aloi par helam davar shetzibur u'siirei avodah zara v'chagiga the carbon tzibur par helam davar shetzibur. Let's just do one example. Is a cow that, let's say, the Bezdin paskin, a Bezdin for entire Shevet, let's say Shevet Ruvain, their Bezdin said that you could turn on a light in Shabbos, and then everybody turned on lights in Shabbos, and then they realized they made a mistake. So not everybody brings their own carbon chatas. The Bezdin, the one Shevet brings a par, because it's called a par, Helam Dover, because they forgot something or they made a mistake of a tzibur. This thing is a par Helam Dover tzibur, but the Mishnah says that that doesn't override Shabbos, v'loyas tuma, and doesn't override truma. So if you're going to go with that logic, that Rav Yaakov is talking to the Tanakama and telling them par helam davar tzibur is a tzibur type of carbon, michlal the ikalaman de omer de yachid, would it be implying that the Tanakama will hold a par helam davar tzibur is a private carbon? It's impossible, because it's brought on behalf of the whole shevet. That's a tzibur carbon. So it's not that you're making the wrong diyukim, and therefore it's not such a good proof. Ela the Tanakama called mahadele. These Rab Meir and Rab Yaakov were just answering the Tanakama. So the Shamei the Kama, they heard that the original Tana, the original Tana gave an example and gave a rule. Carbon tzibur doiches Shabbos v'satuma. If it's a public carbon, you'd override Shabbos and Tuma. The carbon yochid ain't a doiche loyes Shabbos loyes Tuma. They heard that the carbon yochid is a private carbon, would not override Shabbos and Tuma. On this, Rab Meir said that those rules don't apply. Amalei Rab Meir on the second rule, carbon yochid klalahi, is that an overall rule that every carbon yochid is not doiche Shabbos? But like par Yom Kippurim, the carbon yochid he a par Yom Kippur. Even if Yom Kippur comes out on Shabbos, or Yom Kippur itself is like a Shabbos, we see that this private carbon is doichenes Shabbos is a tuma. And the same, that's how you're supposed to learn Rabbi Meir. V'amal like Rabbi Yaakov. Rabbi Yaakov said the same idea. Carbon tzibur klalihi, is the carbon tzibur a general rule that everywhere a carbon tzibur is always doiches Shabbos? But like par helam dova shetzibur ire avodah zara v'chagigel carbon tziburhu be'ein doichin loyas Shabbos loyas yontif tuma. So we find even a carbon tzibur which doesn't override Shabbos. A par helam dova shetzibur cannot be brought on Shabbos. Ella, what they wanted to say is nekoit hai klala b'yadach. This is the general rule about what could override Shabbos and Tumah and what cannot. It has nothing to do exactly with it being a carbon tzibur or a carbon yachid. It depends. Kol shezumanai kavua. If you have to bring it at a certain time, for example, a carbon tamid or a carbon pesach, so then you say doiches Shabbos v'satuma. It's override Shabbos and Tumah. It doesn't matter if it's a carbon tzibur or a private carbon. A par Yom Kippurim, even if you call it a private carbon, since you have to bring it on Yom Kippur, that overrides Shabbos and Tumah. Afilu b'yachid, even if it's a private carbon. But if you don't have a set time that you have to bring it, for example, a par helam davar shetzibur is just a kapara, and therefore it was never specifically designed that it has to be brought on a certain day. So therefore, it would not override loyas Shabbos for loyas Tumah b'afilu b'tzibur. It would not push away Shabbos or Tumah even b'tzibur. So that's just what we just did. This whole Gemara is just knock away a proof that you want to say that the par of Yom Kippur is a tzibur par. It's not necessarily that is the opinion of the Chachamim. Could be the Chachamim would agree that the par of Yom Kippur is actually a private carbon. But nevertheless, let's just get review. We have up until this point a machlokes. How do you view a hybrid carbon? A hybrid carbon means like the par of Yom Kippur, the cow. Who pays for that carbon? The Kohen Gadol. So it should be a yochid. It should be considered like a private carbon. But who's getting kapara with it? The kapara actually, the Kohen Gadol is getting it, but also the whole family of Kahanim are getting kapara. So maybe it's a tzibur carbon. So Rav Amram said it's a tzibur carbon. Rava seemed to say that what Rava seems to hold that it's actually a private. It's a private carbon. It's not a tzibur carbon. So then the Gemara says Eisvei Abaya. Rabaya asked the Rava, how could you say the par of Yom Kippur is a private carbon? The Gemara, there's a brisa that says par, the cow of Yom Kippur. It doesn't say cow of Yom Kippur, but let's assume the sa'ir shel Yom Kippur and the goat of Yom Kippur. Let's say you had the cow and goat all ready for on Yom Kippur, and for somehow they walked out of the Beis Hamikdash and they got lost. She'avdu, the hiprish acherem tachteim, and you set aside others to replace them. So you took another cow and another goat, and then you find the original one. Kulam yamusu, then you put them to death because it's a according to this Tana, it seems to be a private carbon. You put them to death because it's chatos that you already use something else to get the kapara. Now you find the original chatos, you put it to death. The goat of an avodah zara, everything gets put away to death. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Yiru Achi Yistavo. If you find the original carbon, just put them in a pen. Wait till they get a mum, a blemish, via machru, and then sell it. And the money that you sold it for, you could put it back into the Beis Hamikdash to buy a carbon oil. Because although it's a chatas, and it's a chatas that you already found a replacement and used the replacement, still, you don't kill this chatas, the original one that you find later. Because the answer is she'ein chatas tzibur mesa. A chatas that was once belonging to a tzibur is never put to death. So therefore, you have another eitzah. Put it in a pen, wait till it gets a blemish, it breaks its foot or something, then sell it, and use the money for carbon oilers. Al kaponim, we see from this brisa that Reb Shimon holds that the par of Yom Kippur is called a chatas tzibur. Amalei, so Rava will answer you, my par, what par is that brisa talking about? Not the par of Yom Kippur. That's the par of Yom Kippur is a carbon yochid. But the par is referring to is par helam davar shetziba. It's referring to the par of the helam davar shetziba. That's why it's called a chatai siba. So when you look at here, par, it means par of the Helam Dava Shetziba, but not the par of Yom Kippur. So the Gemara asks, why didn't you say, how could you learn pshat like that in the Brisa? Vaha Ishal Yom Kippurim Tani. It's this par and sor of Yom Kippur. So the Gemara says, Ki Tani Adesor. The word Yom Kippur is going only on Sa'ir, on the goat, but not going on the par. So what Rav is doing is playing fancy footwork. This par that the Brisa calls a tzibur par was not referring to the par of Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol's par. It was referring to what? Another par, a par Helam Dova Shel Tzibur. So fine. The Gemara has this final Brisa that really knocks Rava out of the park. V'hatanya, we have a new Brisa. Again, Rava holds, it seems that Rava holds that the cow of Yom Kippur, because it's bought by the Kohen Gadol, it's a private carbon. So the Gemara says, V'hatanya, we learned in a Brisa. Par shel Yom Kippurim, the cow of Yom Kippur. Here it says the word par of Yom Kippur. The Sa'ir shel Yom Kippurim, she'avdu. They got lost. V'ifresh acherem tachteim kulam yimusu. They got lost. You killed it, and they found the originals. They're all put to death. They're Rabbi Yehuda, because he holds it's a private. But Rabbi Shimon Oimim, Yirachi Stavru, v'yamachru, v'yiplan demeim l'ndava. You give them a blemish, and then you can sell it and use the money for a carbon oila. She'ein chatas tzibur mesa, because the chatas that was of a tzibur can never be put to death. So we see that this power of Yom Kippur is called the chatas tzibur. So that's a proof that the chatas, a power of Yom Kippur, is not a private carbon. It's paid by a private person, but really it's called a chatas tzibur, and that's what this Brisa seems to say. So Rava retracts, and Rava says, "Loi tema she'ein chatas tzibur mesa, elaema say she'ein chatas hashutafin mesa." What means is like this: that the chatas of Yom Kippur, the power of Yom Kippur, I'll grant you that it's not a power of a yachid. It's not, because at the end of the day, the kahanim are getting a kapara with this power, but it's not a tzibur. The kahanim are not called a tzibur; they're called partners. It's not a corporation, so to speak. So the Gemara says, so therefore, the reason why you don't put to death this carbon that was lost and you found it, because it's a partnership. A partnership carbon is never put to death, only if it's a private carbon. So, but Rava said semantically, linguistically, the carbon of a power of Yom Kippur is not a corporation carbon, it's a partnership carbon. So the Gemara says, Umay nafka mina. What's the difference what you call it? At the end of the day, it's never put to death if you take a replacement. And for the Gemara, what he wanted to say is that we don't want you to call the family of Kahanim a corporation, a tzibur. We never call all the Kahanim a tzibur. We call them all partners. And the reason is because one would make the mistake and say that if you call the Kahanim a tzibur, what happens if you have a case that all the Kahanim on a psak started putting on a light on Shabbos, because one kohen said you're allowed to put a light on Shabbos, and then they realized they made a mistake. Then what's going to happen? They'll call themselves a tzibur, and they'll bring one par on behalf of all the kahanim. Just like every shevet, if they make a mistake, there's one par brought on behalf of the old shevet. But that's not true. A shevet is called a tzibur. A shevet you would call a corporation, a tzibur. A whole family of kahanim are not called a tzibur, they're called partners. So therefore, Rava wanted you to make sure to call the power of Yom Kippur not a carbon tzibur, but it's a carbon shutafin, a partnership carbon. Okay, Tashema, come in here. The boy.
Bernard,
yes.
Before you go on, didn't we have this argument in Pesachim?
About this?
No, about Yachid versus Tzibor, and there was a whole Indian about that. I think the same Chacham and Rabbi Shimon was also arguing. I think it was in Pesachim, wasn't it? Didn't we have this type of argument?
It's possible. My memory
about Yachid versus Tzibor, and it turned out that it wasn't Tzibor as well. It wasn't a Yachid.
Yes.
I thought we had this argument.
Yes. It's Pesachim Daf Ayin. I see.
Yep.
You're absolutely correct, and that's it. You're 100% right.
And it makes sense because there's a parallel here because of partnership.
Right. Excellent. That's right. I don't have such a good long-term memory, but you're right.
No. It's just these little things, because I'm trying to make a connection, because there's obviously a lot of overlap, and they come up with these things, and we learn from one issue, we learn another issue.
Right.
There's a lot of similarities, but I do remember this specifically. There was I wasn't sure if it was the beginning of the Masechta, which doesn't make sense, or if there was Pesachim, which I think it is.
Right, you're 100%
Like
right.
you said. Okay.
But the main point to remember is that because the Kohen Gadol paid for this power from his own money, but it's bringing a kapara to the rest of the Kahanim. So it's a hybrid. So we don't know what to call it. Is it a tzibor or is it a partnership? Toshma, come in here. The boya Reb Loza. Reb Loza had a question. If you hold that power of Yom Kippur is a carbon yachid, oisun tumura or eina oisun tumura. What does that mean? Tumura means that a person could take a carbon. You see a white cow and a black cow. If this is a carbon, the white one was the carbon. If a person would say the black one should take the place of the white one, that's called tumura. But by saying that, the Torah finds you and says that both of them have a kedusha haguf. So if you say this should be the black should be tumura, should be in exchange for the white one, they both remain kadosh. But that only works is if it's a carbon yachid. A carbon sibor, you cannot make a tumura on. So the Gemara says, if you hold par Yom Kippurim carbon yachid, oisa tumura, or eina oisa tumura. So he asked that question: if you hold par Yom Kippur as a carbon yachid, is it always like a carbon yachid that you could make tumura, or you cannot make tumura? So because the Gemara just asks on this question, by asking this question, the divrei ha'omer that if you hold par is a carbon yachid, it implies to say that there is another opinion that holds it's a tzibor. So there are two choices: either par Yom Kippur is a tzibor or it's a carbon yachid. So that like Rava who said it's a partnership. So no, the Gemara says loy. His question was that according to the Man Diyama that holds the power of Yom Kippur is a private carbon, but the opposite of that is not that it's a tzibur carbon, it's a partnership carbon. Okay, but the Gemara just boils down. What Rava explained is that there are only two choices for this Par Yom Kippur. You could call it a private carbon, or you could call it a partnership carbon, but don't call it a tzibur carbon. So the Gemara we could run through this just a few more minutes. Gufo we learn. Boya Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar had a question. The Divrei Omer, if you have the opinion that what? The Divrei Omer, if you have the opinion that what? Par Yom Kippurim carbon yachid, that Par of Yom Kippur is a carbon yachid, oisa tumura, ayena oisa tumura. Is it such a carbon yachid, a private, that you can make tumura, or you cannot make tumura? So the Gemara that was the question of Rabbi Eliezer. So the Gemara interrupts. What kind of question is he asking? The question, what's the question all about? Do you go after the person that bought it, so to speak, the one that made it holy? Who paid for this carbon? So that is the Kohen Gadol. So then it should be a private carbon. Or do you go after the people who are getting the atonement? There's more than one person getting an atonement with this cow. There's all the Kohanim are getting atonement. So the Gemara says, Pshita, it would be simple to say the Mosa Miskaper Azlinin, that you should go after the people who are getting the atonement, not after the person that paid for it. Because I have another member, the Amar Rabba Bo, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Bo said the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Lezer must have known Rabbi Yochanan because he learned by Rabbi Yochanan. And Rabbi Yochanan said, Hamagdish Ma'asav Chaimish, Vamiskaper Oisa Bar Tmura. We go after the guy getting the kapara that decides who can make the Tmura. The three halachas. But the most important point here is that when it comes to Tumura, you don't look at who paid for the carbon. You look at who is getting the kapara of the carbon. Well, who's getting the kapara of a carbon? A bunch of people. If it's a bunch of people getting the kapara of this par, then you can't do Tumura, because Tumura can only be done if it's a private carbon. If only one person owns the carbon, and then Tumura works. But if it's a bunch of people getting a kapara from this carbon, you can't do Tumura, because the ikar is you look at the mischaper, the guy, all the people getting the kapara. So how could Rabbi Eliezer have this question when Rabbi Yochanan said you always look at the miskaper? So the Gemara says, true. La'olam, I will tell you, pshita lei, it was simple, the basa miskaper azlinan. You go after the people getting the kapara. Okay, granted, so a bunch of kahanim are getting the kapara, but let's ask you, how are the other kahanim getting the kapara? Look at how the Gemara splits an atom. The Gemara is going to say, V'hochi kama bayale, echav kahanim, the brothers of the kahanim, bikvi usa miskapre, are they getting the kapara because they're really part of this carbon, and therefore they're getting the kapara as if they own the carbon. Or dilma, or maybe bekufya miskapre, they're floating, they're getting a floating type of kapara. In other words, they're floating on top of the kohen gadol's kapara. The kohen gadol is really the owner of this carbon, and he's the one that's getting the atonement. But the kahanim are going along for the ride, but they don't really have a part in the carbon itself. So therefore, that it's really, you could view it as you can narrow it as a private carbon, and therefore you could do tamura. Or perhaps when the kahanim get the kapara, it means that they own part of the carbon, even though they didn't pay for it, but they become a part and parcel of this par, and therefore it's a public par, and therefore you can't do tamura. So that was the question. Okay.
Or no, this is very easy to remember. When we shlok kaparas, zot tamurati, it's all yachid.
That's right. That's right. I got to look at that. Can you say zot
tamurati? It's only for yourself or for someone else, but it's not for like a group. I don't believe so. I believe it's just a yachid.
Right. Oh, okay. I got to look at the lashonos over there. Okay, I think we should stop here because this Tashema will take us to the next page, and the sugya doesn't end till here. So we'll leave it over here. We'll leave it over here and leave it at the question. The question is like this. Rabbi Lezer had this question. Power of Yom Kippur. I grant you it's a carbon yachid, right? The kohen gadol paid for it. But perhaps, since many kahanim are getting the kapara, you would not be allowed tamura doesn't take place. It wouldn't be effective. Or do you view it as a total private carbon and tamura would be effective? So we're going to discuss this proof tomorrow. The Gemara is going to bring a proof to that question. Okay. Very good.
Thank you.
Okay. Hard Gemara over here because this is kachim, but we're going to get to back to the service of Yom Kippur. But you see how Yoma goes. It just goes off on tangents. Okay.
Have a good night. Good night.
Good night, everybody.